Really excited for our first podcast today. I've got two very special guests on the show with me. I'll start off by introducing Desmond Von Teichman.
Special, that's very nice.
Broker owner of Royal LePage Locations North and Royal LePage Royal City. Amazing broker. I've worked with Des almost my entire real estate career. And,
it's been my pleasure.
Have to say, one of the most progressive and innovative brokers in the business. So I'm really excited to have Des on the show. And
awesome to be here.
Of course, we've got Phil Soper with us. Pretty awesome guest for our first round here. Phil, CEO and president of Royal LePage Canada. Overseas how many agents do we have now, Phil?
Gosh, it rounds to 20,000, and if you add our little boutiques like Johnson and Daniel and such, we're 21,000. So big old company.
Wow. So also consistently the most influential voice in Canadian real estate, right? You seem to they just give it to you by default every year now, it seems.
And I get no hardware for that. It's tough, but yeah, no, it's very.
You get a lot of love from us, though, Phil.
I do. Takes a village. Thank you guys for carrying me on your sturdy backs.
Well, thanks so much, both of you, for being on today.
Awesome.
So I wanted to touch on kind of some hot button items today. What's happening with the real estate market overall from a national perspective, and then maybe we can dive into like our type of market specifically into the recreational space. So I think that's a great way to get started. We're getting a lot of questions and concerns from our clients about, this unprecedented price growth that we've seen and the shortage of inventory. And we're definitely feeling like some people are getting a bit anxious as to whether or not there's going to be a market adjustment. Obviously, the media, if it leads, it bleeds. So, they tend to report on the negative side. But, I wanted to get, first off, Phil, your take on state of the market right now and where you think we might be headed in 2022.
Whether you're happy or sad, worried or gleeful, really depends on what side of the fence you're on. Are you one of the 70% of Canadians who owns a home? And if you're not planning on going anywhere, you're pretty excited. It's sort of like holding TD shares and not intending to sell them. If they're up 20% year over year, you're going, that's a darn good year, even if it's just on paper. For buyers, though, it's been a really uncomfortable year. 2021 was. The good news is some of that craziness does appear to be easing. While nationally we finished 2021 with prices up over 17%, certainly a lot higher in your trading area, but 17% in the nation, and we're looking at just over 10.5% this year. So, you might say, gosh, you're still double digits. That's not very good for young people trying to get in the housing market, but the trend is the right way. And on $1 million property, 7% is a significant change in terms of where prices are going. In terms of a correction, I like to step back and look at what's driving the market overall. And the big thing that drives housing markets, and part of the reason that Canada has done so well over, say, the last 20 years, is our rate of household formation is high. So, our kids, not yours, Mike, yours have a way to go before they sign a mortgage, but a lot of our kids are in that first-time home buyer group, that millennial group that ranges from mid-20s to high 30s now, and they are leaving their parents' homes and want to set up their own place. And there are more of them than there have been of any other generation. So just organically, before we talk about immigration, there would have been a bump in household formation and demand for housing. You add immigration to that, and Canada being the most successful country in the world in terms of economic immigration. And you need to be building a lot of homes. And we know that we haven't been. We know for the last decade we've been underbuilding. And new Scotia economics research released in 2021 quantified it. We're short 1.8 million homes versus where we should be in this country. We're in last place among advanced nations in the world in terms of homes per capita. And so we've got a hole to dig ourselves out of, because the demand for housing is going to increase, not decrease, over the next decade. And we're not, every year we fall a little farther behind. So over the long term, we can have short-term corrections. We had one in 18 and 19 where home prices flattened, in some places softened a bit. We had one back in 2012. We had a bigger one in 2009. So it's not like home prices go up constantly, contrary to what people think. They do rise rapidly, and then they flatten or they dip a little. But the general trend over our working lives has been up. And the problem now is the curve it is on is a little steeper than makes anybody comfortable.
So let me ask you, Phil, like you touched on like the state of the economy and whatnot in 2009. So now we're looking at several years of a price growth that's outpacing what is historically normal, right?
Right.
How does the situation right now differ from like what we were looking at in 2008 heading into that downturn, like from an economic perspective?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the main thing was the recession of 2020, when the economy shrank by 5.5%, was artificial. We shut the economy down artificially to keep each other safe. We were actually on a tear coming into 2020, at the end of 2019 and into 2020. The economy and the housing market look really healthy and really strong. So then you supercharge it through the pandemic by dropping the cost of money to zero and pumping trillions of dollars of federal government money into economies around the world, not just in Canada, south of the border, Europe, everywhere. And you supercharge it. So, we lost 5% in the economy last year. We got it all back in a year. We're completely recovered. The unemployment rate is actually lower than when the pandemic began. And now we're talking about challenges with inflation, not with a crash. So I'd say the big concern for the housing market is not, is it going to crash? That seems incredibly unlikely. The big concern is it going to continue to, housing inflation going to continue to be so high that it causes social problems?
Mm-hmm. So what do you think what's the solution? So let's first talk about what we're seeing a lot of in the media right now. So CMHC, put out that report yesterday about putting a tax on houses above $1 million. And there's been other government interventions that have been talked about recently in the election campaign, talked about blind bidding, all of those things. What's your take on the government's ability to intervene on what's going on with pricing and affect it with change? Is the only solution supply, or what is your take on their intervention?
The only solution is supply. If people were trading unnecessarily, I don't know how you do that on a grand scale, on a national scale, but if people were trading houses unnecessarily because it was fun or something, you could quell demand with taxes and things. But if someone needs to put a roof over their head, if what we're talking about is people who need a place to live, which is really what we're talking about, because the number of the number of people looking for homes is growing, not just that people are looking for a better home. You could do something with demand-based taxes, but what I worry about, and we've seen this over, starting in the mid-teens, where governments try for the quick fix in election time by slapping a tax on or pointing to villains. It's the foreign investors. Turned out to be a lie, right? They didn't amount to anything material anywhere in Canada, not even West Vancouver. It was people, home flippers. Turned out to be a lie, right? It was smokescreen. Home flipping was such a small part of the market, it didn't impact it. This blind bidding thing is another one. It's the realtor's fault. Somehow the brokerage process is leading to high home prices when we've got 30 bids on one of your properties in Collingwood, Mike. 30 people registering bids, and somehow you did that. Man, you must be a really amazing sales professional.
Yeah, and changing the process from from open to closed. I mean, you still have 30 people vying for one property. Yeah. I mean, that's not going to crush pricing. It's just not. So
what I worry about with these short-term fixes that pop up in election time, and Ontario, we've got an election in 2022, and we're going to see some short-term fix problems, is that it takes our leaders' eyes off the ball. They need to look at housing in the same way we look at healthcare and education. You don't create new universities in a day. You don't create new doctors in a day or nurses. It takes years of planning, and you start to move the needle in the right direction. So we're not going to fix the housing problem for the spring market of 2023, but we could start to make a dent in 2024 and 25 and onward by reducing the cost and the cycle time it takes for a developer to get an idea into a key that they can hand over to a consumer. And it should be a challenge. If we were in the automotive business and we saw another region of the world, say the Germans were able to design, build, and launch a new model at half the rate that Canadians could, well, what would we be doing? What would the senior team be doing as we sat around? We'd be saying, how do we reduce the time it takes for us to get our brilliant designs into market where we can actually receive a check from a customer? So our municipalities, aided by federal money going to provinces, going to municipalities with all sorts of strings attached, should be saying, we need to do this in half the rate in 2 years and then half again in 4 years. We need to make it less expensive so that cost doesn't get passed on to consumers. And I think the most importantly, we've got to de-risk the development process so that the land that we've got banked in an area like the Greater Toronto area, people say, you need to get rid of the Greenbelt to solve the housing supply crisis. No, we don't. If you look at the amount of developable land, and I'm talking like single detached homes, not even densification, which is also something we need to do. There's massive amounts of developable land in the Golden Horseshoe of Southern Ontario. It's just not being moved into product because people are being conservative, developers, and understandably so. If it takes 5 years or 10 years to go from idea to building, it's like Scotch. I talk about a risky business, right? You put stuff that you're not going to sell for a decade. How much of it do you build? How much of it do you make? And we need to make it easier for developers to take risks.
And do you think that's at the municipal level, Phil? And I'm curious about your answer to this because you've got such a much more global perspective than I do. But certainly up here, I think we see that that's been a huge limiting factor for supply. Is there's just been the development process at the municipal level has just been onerous. And I want to qualify that by saying, look, we've got a great thing going here. We must protect the natural environment. We must protect the lifestyle resources we have here. So I'm not saying willy-nilly development, but there has to be a nice balance between taking a product to market and time, because right now I find it's kind of skewed. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think the part that's frustrating in the whole situation that we're in is that it's not like this. The demographic shift that we're facing right now, it's not like it was not predictable, right? I mean, we've been like in Collingwood, we've got a freeze on development because their water infrastructure couldn't support any more growth. But it was as if they just figured it out a month before it happened.
Then kept it a really big secret for a while just to make sure that everyone really got their blood boiling.
Yeah, so I guess it's like, from a municipal and a national level, how did we get caught with our pants down so far on this, right?
The great demographer David Foote, the author of Boombuster Echo, makes jokes about the public policy planning process. And he would say, if he was here and still working, he would say, we knew the millennials would be a problem as related to housing 38 years ago, when they started appearing in such big numbers. It's not like they've been imported. Those babies every year get a year older. We know when they're going to buy houses. We know when they're going to need a home. So it was clearly telegraphed, and we haven't done anything about it. But in answer to your question about what level of government, many times the federal government is stuck with a problem that's outside of their jurisdiction. That's the nature of our federal system. So what do? They say, if you take these steps, which are clearly within your purview, and it is real estate policy law, is a provincial responsibility in Canada, we'll give you this money. And if you don't, you won't get this money. And so they're saying it's your responsibility, over to you. And then the province does the same thing to the cities. It's not perfect. It's obviously slower than, say, if the feds went direct, but it respects everybody's authority and responsibility. And as long as everybody agrees on the problem, which I believe everybody does now, not on how to solve it, but everybody agrees the problem, it does have to be all three levels of government. And I think the feds should start it the same way they do with healthcare.
Yep.
Even though that's not their responsibility.
So just to sum this up, what we're seeing is primarily driven by the millennials shifting into home ownership, and then aided by, immigration continuing to build to. So, I guess the question is, if supply is going to be a lagging thing for the government to intervene on, to really be able to create more supply in a way that's would outpace demand.
Yeah.
How long do you think it's going to be for us to see, at least at a national level, until we got back to a market that could be even close to balanced? 3 months of inventory anyway.
Yeah.
So
it will get better because we will get people priced out of the market, and they'll delay leaving their parents' home, or they'll delay doing what they really want to do with their lives, and there'll be periods of slower market growth. But it's the trend line I worry about. The trend line is clearly pointing up, and there's some subtleties that have changed. We're living longer. People are living a long time, and baby boomers, the parents of the millennials, they're doing the 2-for-1 thing. and you see that in your trading area tremendously, right?
Big time.
They get rid of their millennial kids, and they say, "Well, I don't need this big legacy family home anymore, so I'm going to buy a smaller place in the city, maybe a condo, and I'm going to buy a lake home in Collingwood." And so suddenly, the baby boomers are in on the game, and they're creating, call it household formation, and a demand for houses. And it wasn't that long ago, immigration in this country, when we hit 200,000 a year, it was a big deal. Well, we're at 400,000 plus now. The Canadian population is going to hit 40 million in a blink. That's a sizable population. And we're already a couple of million homes behind. So there's other, call it subtleties, that are causing challenges. Some of them probably couldn't have been predicted. But the good news is a lot of the work has been ongoing for a while. We know, and Des mentioned this, for the environment, we have to make better use of our limited resources, and not just the land itself, but the impact that sprawl has on our sewage, our power, the use of water. So we have to densify our cities. And you guys are well traveled, particularly you Des. You see the beautiful cities of Europe with their overwhelming greenness, and they don't look like they're dominated with skyscrapers.
No.
And yet the densification, the number of homes they're able to put into a city are tremendously higher. So we need to get beyond the not in my backyard, not in my neighborhood mentality. It's more of a big city. It's more of a Toronto issue than in recreational focused markets. But
I'm not sure you're right, Phil. I mean, we have a lot of not in my backyard mentality.
Do you really?
Here. I mean, and what I find astounding, and I'm generalizing somewhat, but I find it amazing that there's people. I consider myself a local now, but if you asked a local, there's no way, right? I wasn't born here, so I'm not a local. According to the locals, my kids aren't even locals, and they were born here. But what's amazing is the people who've been here 4 years who consider themselves local now want to see no change. Right, which I get, right? You bought into a concept in a town like we're sitting here in Thornbury, and you don't want to see the character of the town change, and I totally get that. But you can't just have a supply problem that continues unchecked, because then as you said, Phil, and you're 100% correct, that creates all sorts of other social problems in a town like this that can only be solved with supply, right? It can't
Mike was
just
mentioning
be
water challenges, right?
Yeah, water challenges. I mean, we're starting to face
affordability
issue, like similar to what Whistler has gone through over the last few years, right? I mean, we're still primarily like a recreational area that's most of our businesses are service based, and now all of those service providers, there's nowhere for them to live, right? I mean, most of them are now coming in. They're driving 45 minutes to get to Collingwood to work at Blue Mountain, right? There's nothing available.
Someone who was born in the region wanted to be a teacher. So, and then you look at the price of a home in the region now, where are they going to move?
Yeah. Well, that's the great question. I mean, because you look at the numbers are crazy. I mean, we were up 30% last year on single family detached, but we were up 168% on single family detached in the area since 2010. I mean, wow. And we're very, very close to $1 million average sale price in Southern Georgia Bay now. It's tough, right? It's tough as a one income family, particularly. I mean, it's not as attainable as it once was, and it does affect the people. Like I was just saying a moment ago about local versus non-local. It's really hard to be a local person here and afford to stay right now. I think I hear that again and again from friends who are true locals. Right?
A couple issues on that front too. I mean, we're not seeing locals move. I mean, and that's
100%.
that's partially what's driving our supply issue here, is that the locals are too afraid of being displaced. You've lived in your home in Thornbury for 10 years.
Even if they like a new home, they're
saying, and I mean, at this point,
I can't afford to move.
It's difficult for me to even say to, a potential seller that I could secure you a rental for 6 months if you needed it, right? Like it's really become a problem. It's really like the only people that can afford to take the risk are people that are weekenders, right? So, if they get pushed out of the market for 6 months, so be it.
Yeah.
They can stay in Toronto, but it's really become a big issue at the local level. I mean,
now it's not all bad news, of course.
No. We own houses. We're happy.
Yeah, 70% of us are in the market. We actually saw this is something that the media has completely skated over, despite our efforts to bring it to people's attention. We saw probably the biggest jump in the Canadian home ownership rate in this millennium in 2020. So we had a lot of, and the only way you jump up in the home ownership rate, the percentage of the population who owns, is by adding first-time homebuyers. So the number of first-time homebuyers that rushed into the market in 2020 when the pandemic first hit was really material. So a lot of young people got into home ownership. And if you look at all generations, that 7 out of 10 Canadians, owning their homes has been very, very good for them. It's been one of call it the bedrock of their financial security. And I don't see that changing over the millennials' lifetime. Who knows what the future will bring, but I can tell you there are few places on the planet that are as attractive to live, work, and raise a family as Canada.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. I was listening to some previous talks that you had done, and you were touching on rental versus ownership in Canada, and how Canadian attitudes towards rent is very quite different than what we see on a worldwide basis, right? Like it's people quite happily rent in some of our overseas markets, versus here it's really looked at like
totally.
It's so. What do you think that is?
In my personal opinion, I remember I was on a Steve Paikin had me and Dr. Schiller of the Case-Shiller Index on his show. This is an economist who's won a Nobel Prize. So they obviously had a cancellation, and that's why they slipped me out of the program. Anyway, brilliant guy. And one of the things that we talked about was the fact that homeownership isn't equivalent to citizenship. And the example he used was Switzerland. And I've got a friend who's a wealth management. He's got a fund, an investment fund, an American guy who moved to Switzerland, married a Swiss woman, and he made that the home. And he told me the homeownership rate there is like 25%. And it's because banks don't tend to lend to individuals to buy homes. That's not the Swiss way. So if you live in that particular country, which is often ranked in the top 3 to 5 countries in the world, along with Canada, homeownership isn't equivalent to personal success. But, and here's my unproven theory, North America was settled in a large part by people who couldn't own property where they came from. They escaped a feudal style system in many cases, where they were tenants on the land, and they came to the New World, and one of the big promises was a piece of Canada, piece of America. And my grandparents on my mom's side were Scottish immigrants, and they were given farmland as part of their their immigration package to Canada, or not given it, but had access to it. If they came out and they farmed, there was big incentives, and so they moved to Alberta and they created a farm. Well, they were young people in Scotland, but their prospects are owning a big, a section of land, 640 acres of land in Scotland were zero, and they had it here. So, and I fast forward to our immigrants are obviously coming from different places now. I lived in India after my undergrad for a year, wanted the big adventure. A lot of people in Mumbai where I worked did not own their property. Some of the wealthy people owned their flats, but a lot of, most people never considered owning a flat in a city like Bombay. But when they come to Canada, they see that as a reality. As a result, Royal LePage research shows that people born in Canada have a lower home ownership rate than people who were born elsewhere after 7 years. So you give them time to catch up. And it's material. It's like 3% higher if you were born elsewhere. So I think that's part of it. It's
what's that number again, Phil? I remember you telling me that number, that the number of new
like
Canadians who want to...
72% or 73% for people not born in Canada, and about 3% lower for people born in Canada.
But think about that. If the immigration numbers, economic immigration numbers, are 350 to 400,000, and 70% of them within 7 years want to own a home, I mean, you want to talk about a material demand change, and supply is just not addressing it, which goes right back to the top of the conversation, right?
Right. So it's since the Second World War, it's been public policy in Canada to help people own their homes, and it's worked out really well. I don't think it's a be-all and end-all. We shouldn't, no one should kill themselves just to own a home. But it's well within the grasp of working Canadians to own a home. Maybe not to own a detached home in Rosedale in Toronto or West Vancouver in the Lower Mainland. That may be beyond the reach of most people. But to own a home in Canada, absolutely. And one of the really cool things we've seen over the last, it actually started in the middle of the last decade, but really supercharged during the pandemic, is people have said, you know what, we can do it. We can own a home. All we have to do is, well, it used to be moved to Barrie, but Barrie's too expensive now.
Right.
So we've moved to Aurelia, maybe North Bay, maybe St. John, New Brunswick. And we can own a home, us. Our young family, we never dreamed we'd own the white picket fence. So it's completely within the realm of reality. And I believe young people are going to find a way to continue to own homes. If you look at Vancouver, which have had much more expensive homes than Toronto for years and years and years, the home ownership rate isn't that much lower. It's about 65%, so it is lower, but it's not that much. 2/3 of people ended up finding a way to own their homes. So it's we can do it. The young people can do it, and they set their mind on it. They will do it.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit, and let's focus on our local market here, so Southern Georgian Bay, but from a broader perspective, just recreational markets in general across Canada. Obviously, some pretty unprecedented gains, certainly since the pandemic hit. I want to maybe, Des, you can touch on, what do you think is primarily driving it here locally? Like it obviously a little bit
bunch
different.
Of stuff. It is. This is a weird little microcosm, but we see it in our other areas like Guelph and stuff like that. I mean, the pandemic had a disproportionate effect on real estate demand in markets like ours. It just did. I mean, and it's interesting. You say the recreational market. I mean, how many people have you sold houses to, Mike, in the last 2 years that are moving here because of the lifestyle, but are not necessarily what you'd typically classify as recreational buyers? They're not coming here for the 10-week ski season, right? There are people who've been exposed to the area who have said, you know what, if I don't have to be at First Canadian Place Monday through Friday, maybe I move to the chalet and then again bring the family up here. I mean, the school down the street, their enrollment almost doubled, didn't it? Over the course of a year.
Brand new school in Meaford was over capacity before it even opened.
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Yeah. So that's not a recreational. I think those people are moving here. I would call that an amenity migration, right? I think that's I'm stealing one of Phil's terms there. But these are people who are moving for a reason. They're like, the proximity to my office is less important to me now than my lifestyle. And I think that fueled a big part of our market. But there is the cadre of people that would be the traditional recreational buyers, and I know a bunch of them at the ski club, who said, look, I can't travel anymore, right? And I don't really want to rent, and I have the necessary disposable income, and I'm going to get into the property market there so I can do my 10-week ski program, and I can come up after the shoulder season, and there's great golfing, and the trails are amazing, and and the local food scene here is really cool. Like I was saying to someone the other day, my mom, when I'm a transplant, I'm from Toronto. My mom, when we used to come up for the weekends, she'd go to the grocery store in Toronto and bring all of her food up here. Now, when she goes to the city, she goes to the local farmers market, brings all her food down to the city, right? It's just, the amenities here are so terrific. And I think that's what's fueling the market, but I don't think it's a traditional recreational market anymore.
Yeah, I think it's, I think people are looking at their recreational properties in a bunch of different ways now, but specifically, I think a lot of people are looking at them as investment vehicles, where in the past it was a place where I'm willing to shell out the money to have the nice lifestyle. Now people are saying, well, if I can invest $1 million in a place in the Blue Mountains and that's returning $100,000 a year to me, seems to make sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, at a 30% average sale price increase last year, you're not wrong, right? I mean, the craziness is, to be a year in the market to make out $300,000 on $1 million home. I mean, that kind of return. Phil, I'd be interested in your take on this. That's completely unsustainable.
Absolutely.
And I think you're taking a risk when you get into a property for that reason. The great thing about this area is you can use it for your own personal enjoyment. And if there's a massive lift, then you're the beneficiary. If there's not a massive lift, you've still got this great place in a great area that is likely to maintain its value over the long term, because the market fundamentals won't change up here. I mean, this is an amazing place to live, and the supply shortage, even if fixed, isn't going to change the fact that it's an amazing place to live.
Yeah.
Got a couple of other things to throw into the mix. One of them is back to the demographic push. You're getting baby boomers exiting urban areas and relocating to recreational areas. So they just rather live in a home on a lake with less traffic and better views than in downtown Toronto. That's nothing new. What's new is that the baby boomers are the second largest cohort in history. There's over 9 million of them, and it's the largest group of retirees moving to recreational property that we've ever had. And those millennials, those pesky millennials, the older ones now, I mean, the Gen Xers are already doing this. They're just not as many of them, so it didn't have the same impact. But that wave of millennials that are hitting 40 are just starting to get the age where they, if they've got two professional working family, they're buying cottages too. So you've got, and they're the largest cohort in Canadian history at 10 million people. So just demographically, time of life, completely predictable. You've got these two groups in their two big surge age groups putting focus on property. And the second one, so that's the one, it's demographically driven. The second one, and you mentioned Guelph, Des, and it triggered the memory back to the middle of the teens when we released the research on what we dubbed the exurbs. I'm sure you'll remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And essentially what we saw way back in like 2015 was that technology had advanced to the point, and the availability of broadband in smaller cities and towns and rural and recreational areas in this country had reached the point where certain classes of workers were able to relocate from big cities to what we call the exurbs, urban living, suburban, and then exurban would be somewhere that was within, call it a long drive of the big city, like Guelph or Collingwood or Barrie, and they could work there. And the last one was employers were starting to follow the labor or the skills as opposed to the other way around. Well, along comes the pandemic, and we all know, the world switches on a dime. I was reading a Business Week cover story this morning on Shopify, and the guy who runs that company, a Canadian out of Ottawa, shocked the world when he said in like May of 2020, early in the pandemic, he said, well, I sent everybody home, everything works, so my 7,000 person company is now are permanently work from home. I'm exiting all my leases. 7,000 people suddenly work from home. So he was an extreme example, but that was already underway. There was no way we could have done what we did as a global economy and spin on a dime if the networking infrastructure hadn't been there already.
Right.
And it's accelerating, right? You're probably seeing, have you got any of Elon Musk's Star Internet?
Oh, Skylink.
In your trading area?
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. I mean, and frankly,
our broadband's pretty good here, though. Like we've got fiber going through most of our towns and stuff like that. That Skylink, I think, I'm one of those Gen Xers that's got a cottage. So I could really use it at the cottage because I can't do a meeting like this there.
Well, I know they're experimenting with it in the Eastern Kawarthas, Stony Lake area. I've got friends on the lake who are using it, and it's amazing. You've got 5-level speeds or close to beamed from the sky. It's like sci-fi stuff. And that pilot, chosen in Ontario Lake country, cottage country, is going to expand rapidly. And you could conceivably work in Inuit or Iqaluit, or somewhere like Gander or something. I guess Gander's probably got good internet, but some small dildo, Newfoundland, and carry on a conversation like we're having today.
So let's pin you guys down for some predictions. I've read some of your predictions for this year. You're pretty bullish on what you think we're going to do nationally. Were we in the low double digit, 10% across the board is what Royal LePage is. So let me ask both of you, what do you think is going to happen with recreational markets in comparison to that? So ours specifically here, what do you?
Yeah, so I got teed up on Post Media to answer that exact question last week, and I was very conservative when your PR folks, Phil, put me in touch with them, and I said, can I say 15 to 20%? And they said no ranges. I think we're being conservative at 15. I think we may even be conservative at 20 because again, we're grade 10 economics here. We've got massive demand. There's no supply, and you can't wave a magic wand to Phil's point and create sufficient supply to slake the demand. I don't see interest rates going up so meteorically that it's going to affect demand cycles. So I think that it's going to be 20+% in this area next year, and I'm worried that it could be more because again, I don't think it's healthy.
Yeah. Phil,
I agree with Des completely. It is better than it was last year. And part of it is just because if you raise prices by 30% in a single calendar year, there is an absolute limit to what people can afford.
2 calendar years in a row here.
So we are pricing people out of the market. There's not infinite number of people who both want to and can afford to move. So it will take buyers out of the market, at least temporarily. So I think we will see some easing. If you were doing 30% in 2021, 20% makes sense to me in 2022. Some interesting things. I think people are looking for deals now. In the early part of the pandemic, people were saying, I need space. I need single detached. I need to spread out because, this horrible disease, I've got to live by myself in isolation. Well, we're getting through that, right? 90% vaccinated, antivirals coming through, and a lot of the crazies who weren't getting vaccinated are getting sick and recovering and natural immunity. So we're working our way through this pandemic, and we'll learn. It'll move. What's the term? From pandemic to endemic. Where it's like a cold or something. It's just part of society. And I think then people are going to be looking for the little parts of the housing economy that have deals. As a result, we're forecasting that condominiums in the Greater Toronto Area are going to rise at a faster rate in 2022 than single detached. First time in years. And why? Because the gap between condominiums and detached homes grew as large as I've ever seen it in percentage terms. And that's going to attract people. If you lower a price, you find the point at which buyers will rush in. So I think we'll see people looking for bargains, including in recreational property, off lake, townhouse style homes.
Well, in townhouses, that's interesting that you should say that, Phil, because townhomes were really led the charge here last year. Our average was up 30%, but townhomes, I think, were up almost 50% last year.
Like the median price was up 54%.
Yeah, something like that. It was really just right exactly what Phil was just saying.
So, one last thing that I want to touch on and not keep you guys here all day. So we're talking about the market, the supply issues, the runaway prices, but there's some interesting things happening in our market, particularly at the luxury, in the luxury market. So I wonder if I'm getting the sense that the demand for luxury is building at a more rapid pace than at our average price points. We're starting to see, we had a $5.75 million waterfront listing in Thornbury last week that was sold out of our brokerage. Like uncharted territory.
And it's sold over asking.
And I was like, I don't know if this.
I don't think we can say what it sold for because it's not closed yet. But
So, but I was told actually that there was four offers.
Yep. 4 offers. That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
Like at a $6 million price point in Thornbury,
which is unprecedented. You say $6 million in Rosedale, and you go, okay, well that's what it is. But that's unprecedented up here. It truly is.
Well, the depth of the buyer market, at that price point, is pretty mind-boggling.
It is, but then the big competition to the luxury market is these new builds, and I know because I know a ton of the builders in the area, and there's some $5-10 million builds going on right now, and not a couple of them, like a lot of them.
Yeah,
right.
So what do you think?
Question for you guys: what the American market is never a huge percentage of the buyers in Canada's recreational property market, but it impacts prices on the margin. Do you think the easing of boarding restrictions and the return of American or maybe European buyers will impact your market the way it might in the Muskokas?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I have had a number of clients that have bought in the area here, luxury, that they probably wouldn't have done had they not been displaced by their luxury Florida home or their luxury place in Cabo, right? So there is a little bit of that going on. And like to piggyback on that, I've always questioned people moving here full-time out of the city. They move their family up here, whether or not they're actually long-term people in our market, or as soon as things get back to normal
I wonder
in
about that as
Toronto,
well.
are they, well, now I want to go out on Friday night with my friends, but at this point we've never got back to that at a consistent level. So there's been no fear of missing out, right?
But to Phil's point, I mean, I don't think we have the same level of foreign buyers they do in Muskoka, as an example, because a lot of the draw of our area, especially traditionally, has been the ski hills. And if you're a foreign buyer, if you're an American buyer, there's some higher hills that you could buy. You could buy real estate at. Yeah. But we are 2 hours from the largest urban center in the area, and that fuels we have a massive feeder market here, and I think that Greater Golden Horseshoe GTA and Greater Golden Horseshoe really fuels our market. And I'm not saying that there are no American or foreign buyers. I mean, you, Mike, I don't know what your perspective on that is, but I certainly don't think it's a needle mover in this market.
I think one of the things that's causing exponential growth here is that the more people that come here from Toronto, the more it attracts.
I agree 100%.
Because now all of my friends are here, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, Collingwood, Southern Georgian Bay, I think has changed a little bit.
Totally.
I think when we're up at the ultra luxury end, people would choose Muskoka. That was just where you went. You might have a condo here in the winter that used, and then you were up at the cottage. But things seem to have changed now, where it's not you don't buy in Collingwood because you can't afford in Muskoka anymore.
Right.
You make a
conscious decision.
Yeah. You want to be here. So I think that's one of the big things.
And this is a cool 4-season area, right? I mean, like Muskoka kind of and I love Muskoka, don't get me wrong, but Muskoka is a really terrific, 1 to 3 season place. But the winter, it's a long winter in Muskoka, right? Yeah. And your point, I think, is 100% right. You get a couple people who move up here, and my brother's that way. My brother's got 2 or 3 or 4 friends that have moved up here with their families recently. He's now like, maybe I really don't need to be in the office. Like, it's my brother is thinking about it. And he's got 3 or 4 or 5 other friends that they're in their peer group that would happily sell their houses in, Bennington or Moore Park or, some of these more affluent neighborhoods, and come up here with a scat of money in their pocket and not possibly be able to spend all that money on their real estate up here. So there's that as well. This market, while it has grown massively, the average sale price here is just not in keeping with what the average sale price is in some of the markets in Toronto that are feeding us, as an example.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. Well, that's great, guys. Thanks so much for your input today. It's always fun to catch up with you, Phil. It's been a while since we've been on the golf course together, so I hope we can get back to that soon.
I know you're itching to get back and defend your President's Cup trophy.
I might have to come and be your caddy next time.
I really think that trophy is going to go very nicely
right
in
there,
this cabinet behind me. But that's great. I think that was a good overview of things. So I think it's fair to say that it would shock all of us if we saw prices retreat next year or this year.
I just don't know what causes it at this point.
Yeah.
Good luck with your podcast, Mike. I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
You should see the lineup he's got, Phil. We're going to want to subscribe.
Oh, I will.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Thanks so much.
Take care, you guys.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Nice to see you, Phil. Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.
No, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.